Syria is a place where your interests quite closely align with those of Israel. How are you coordinating with Israel with respect to Syria?
We're not.
Not at all.
No. We have no relations with Israel. I think in Syria, we have our interests are aligned also with Jordan, with the other Arab countries. We are working within the Arab world of mobilizing a group of countries in order to have some influence on the political process in Syria.
Was the U.S. decision to move its embassy to Jerusalem and to cut off funding for UNRWA, which supports the Palestinian refugees, was it a mistake?
I think the decision to move the embassy was a mistake, that we disagreed with it vehemently. We believe that Jerusalem is a final status issue that should be decided at the end of the talks. We believe that it violates the principle of not taking unilateral actions that jeopardize the final status talks, and this is what happened. Now, the administration has said that the final borders of Jerusalem were subject to negotiations, so they didn't really recognize East Jerusalem as being part of Israel. And they said that the status of the holy sites remains as is, so that means they didn't recognize Israeli sovereignty over the holy sites. So what have they done? Inflamed the passions of 1.5 billion Muslims. And in the process, it led to a deterioration in the relationship between the US and the Palestinian Authority, which makes it more difficult to engage and to try to talk about peace. The issue with UNRWA is tragic, because UNRWA is responsible for the education of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian children. And it's responsible for running schools for refugee camps. It's responsible for providing milk for kids. It's responsible for... That's what it does. And if we don't support UNRWA, the misery in the camps goes up. The potential to recruit extremists goes up. And violence goes up. So I hope that the US will find a way to reverse that decision, or to find other means to support institutions that provide humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians in the refugee camps.
Thank you. So last month, the Canadian Foreign Minister issued a tweet calling for the release of 2 activists who'd been detained in Saudi Arabia. And the Saudi reaction was fierce.
Yes.
Tom Friedman called it an absurd overreaction. Others have said it was quite out of line. The Saudis, you pulled your students from Canada, people receiving medical treatment, diplomats, froze airlines. It's been a deep freeze between the 2 countries. Chrystia Freeland, the foreign minister, was here yesterday and said you 2 have been talking. I just wonder if you could comment on where you see that dispute, how it's evolving, how it will be resolved, and also talk about human rights in Saudi Arabia, which she's not the only one to have raised concerns about crackdowns on activists broadly.
Yes, 2 things. The students are in Canada until we can find a place to move them, so we didn't pull out the students. The patients, we don't have patients in Canada. I believe there were only 2.
Okay.
So that's exaggeration. We stopped new investment in Canada, and we stopped new Canadian investment in Saudi Arabia, and we stopped airline traffic to Canada, and we asked Canada to take their ambassador back, and we recalled our ambassador, but we didn't cut relations. It is outrageous, from our perspective, that a country will sit there and lecture us and make demands. We demand the immediate release. Really, we demand the immediate independence of Quebec. We demand the immediate granting of equal rights to Canadian Indians. What on earth are you talking about? You can criticize us about human rights. You can criticize us about women's rights. America does. State Department issues reports every year. British Parliament does. European Parliament does. French Parliament does. German government does. Others too. That's right. You're right. We can sit down and talk about it. But We demand the immediate release. What are we, a banana republic? Would any country accept this? No, we don't. You do this, you play into the hands of the extremists who are opposing our reform process. If we don't take steps, it means that we're weak. If we take steps, we damage a relationship with a friendly country. We didn't do this. You did. Fix it. Fix it. You owe us an apology. You can talk to us about human rights anytime you want. We'd be happy to have that conversation like we do with all of our allies. But lecturing us? No way. Not going to happen. And enough is enough. We don't want to be a political football in Canada's domestic politics. That's what we became. Find another ball to play with, not Saudi Arabia. And that's why the reaction in our country was so strong. Very easy to fix. Apologize. Say you made a mistake.
Times. Could you say a few words about the falling out on the one hand of the Saudi Arabia and the UAE on the one hand and Qatar on the other? Are you moving toward a resolution of that situation?
It's not a falling out. It's just we don't want to have anything to do with them. The Qataris, since the mid-90s, have been sponsoring radicals. They have been inciting people. They have become a base for the leadership for the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, you have to keep in mind, is what begot us Takfir and Hijrah, which begot us Al-Qaeda, which begot us Al-Nusra. The Qataris allow their senior religious clerics to go on television and justify suicide bombings. That's not acceptable. The Qataris harbor and shelter terrorists. That's not acceptable. And Nashri, the head of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in 2000, entered Saudi Arabia on a Qatari passport. We captured Al-Qaeda types coming into Saudi Arabia with Qatari passports. The Qataris know this. The Americans know this. The world knows this. The Qataris pay ransom to terrorist groups, including $500 million to Hezbollah in Iraq, $50 million to Qasem Soleimani, according to text messages between the Qatari ambassador in Iraq and the foreign minister of Iraq, including I don't know how much to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Is that acceptable? If we gave $1 to Hezbollah in Iraq, we'd be sued in a court down the street. And so the Qataris use their media platforms to spread hate. We have phone conversation that the Libyans gave us after they overthrew Gaddafi, where the then Emir of Qatar is telling Gaddafi how he's recruiting princes and tribal leaders and military officers and members of the royal family to cause mischief and destabilize Saudi Arabia, and predicted that within 10 years there would be no royal family in Saudi Arabia. Is this acceptable? They do the same thing in Bahrain and in Kuwait and in the Emirates.